Thank you, Bicycle, for holding my camera. If somebody tells you your braking lights of your car is broken, how are you going to check if that's true? That happened to me today, and here's how I tried to find out. Turned out the braking light actually works. But that's the thing when it comes to learning, right? When it comes to learning something new, when it comes to changing something, we need to be aware of what's currently happening before. So before we read a book, before we listen to a keynote speech, before we listen to a podcast, it's fundamental for us to find out in which state we are currently in. And that leads me to the story where I recently got asked to host a keynote for a sales event. Because I was asked by Stefan and invited if I could host a keynote for his sales event. Well, first, I was flattered that he invited me. And second, I said only if it's not longer than 20 minutes.
We live in the same outside world, right? So we live in the world of Herbrechtingen, of Hauftechnik, of the Allianz Arena, of this castle. But we all cannot directly experience this outside world. We only experience this outside world through our inner world, through our own senses, through our own experience, through everything that we have already gone through and lived through. And this means that when we want to learn something new, we can only ever learn this through looking inside and going through that inner world.
And especially a keynote about learning, it shouldn't answer all the questions, right? I believe that it should answer some of the questions that people might have. So the title of the keynote was
Good morning. Oh wow, this is exciting.
From good to great. How do we actually get better at the things that we want to become better at? And prior to the event, I produced a small video trailer for a company, which I really love to do because I could then set the stage for the whole event. I could set the theme for the event because the theme for the event was your experience matters. So it wasn't that the experience of a few selected people that are hosting the keynotes or a few selected people that are giving presentations during the event is important. No, it's about the experience of the people that are participating in the event. Because that's also what I believe. If we host events where there are 50 people present, it's a waste of time if it's only 3 people who are talking throughout the whole day. It's much more effective if we find a way to bring the people together, get them talking, and find a format how they can start interacting with each other and how they can start sharing their knowledge. I believe that's much more valuable. In the keynote itself, I talked a lot about human perception and awareness because, like with the braking light of the car, that's quintessential if we look at learning, because learning has something to do with changing. Learning something always means that something is changing. Something in the brain is changing, my abilities are changing, the way that I interact with the world is changing. So a lot of the keynote is about how does our brain actually work there.
It's always this circle. We have a so-called mental representation of the whole world in our brain. It's the simulation that already exists, and we only compare the prediction to our sensory input all of the time. And then only if we feel like, okay, something might have changed, only then we will adapt our mental representation.
And then something that I also like to introduce into the keynote is the work of Carl Anders Ericsson. Carl Anders Ericsson used to research on expertise. For the whole of his academic life, he tried to find out how people become experts in anything. And what he developed there was a method called deliberate practice. And that's also something that I like to introduce and like to show in my keynote speeches. When we talk about learning and You know, learning is the topic that I talk about most of the time, sometimes all day, every day. Most people think it is something external. It's something that where we actually need something from the outside, right? That's a good timing that this guy is coming down here, because when we talk about learning, we think it's something that's delivered to us, right? Like this lorry is just delivering, I don't know what, to this construction site. But it isn't the case. Learning is a lot more like the example that I gave you in the beginning of the car when my braking light doesn't work. Or I don't know if it's actually working. Being able to learn better means I need to find a way to find out where I currently am, how my body is oriented, how my thoughts are oriented, what the biggest questions are that I currently have, how I'm oriented in relation to the outside world. It's not about delivering something to me. And that's something that I'm trying to stress in everything that I do, because I believe if we understand that, if we take that into account, then we can all become better learners, and we can all become better at anything that we want to become better at. How do we get from good to great? It's got something to do with finding out what's happening here. That's the first step. If I know what's happening here, if I know what makes me tick, if I understand what my needs are, then I will get in control of my learning process. And then all the magic can happen. I don't need a keynote speech for that. I don't need a book for that at first. All I need first is awareness. Oh, and if you're wondering why this is in English, well, the keynote was in English and I thought I'd rather not mix the languages in this video. So, sorry for that.